Women in film have always been disadvantaged. From the inability for women to find work in the American film industry in the 1920s due to the rise of the studio systems that reigned supreme, prioritizing the hiring of male actors, writers, directors, and crew, to the more recent infamous scandals regarding extremely wealthy and powerful men in the industry such as Harvey Weinstein, it is clear that women have always had problems working in this industry. As such, due to the widespread male dominance of the industry and thus a strong male perspective focusing on heteronormative ideas and perspectives, it only made sense that when I was watching the 2010 movie Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, a movie about a 23-year-old named Scott Pilgrim who finds himself in a situation in which he has to fight off a girl's 7 evil exes to win over her, it wasn't really a big surprise. And Ramona, now infamously considered one of the quintessential stereotypes of what is considered in film as a manic pixie dream girl, for better or for worse, is exemplified here in full effect. But what is the manic pixie dream girl? A manic pixie dream girl, a term coined by film critic Nathan Rabin used to describe a type of female character in film, describes the character trope as, quote, a character who exists solely in the fevered imaginations of sensitive writer-directors to teach broodingly soulful young men to embrace life and its infinite mysteries and ventures. According to Nicole Vincent in her piece Manic Pixie Dream Politics, a focus on post-feminist muses, quote, the manic pixie dream girls of the modern world are considered ancillary characters to the greater story of male growth. They remain small and temporary, yet truly unforgettable. As in the case of these female characters, their sole purpose is not for them to be real characters, but rather to serve as the assistant to the hero's success. A catalyst to their self-actualization, if you may say.
Hi.
Hi.
The woman to serve their man, as in the end, they are not really their own person, they only live in the shadow of the man they chose to guide. As such, Ramona Flowers in Scott Pilgrim vs. the World is exactly that. She is made to be quirky, attractive, to be infatuated over by the male protagonist, and is characterized by a, quote, hypersexualization that makes these fictitious women appear less human. In Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, Ramona Flowers is the main character's love interest, and in this movie, she is a pivotal character, but not for the way it may seem. She's Scott's dream girl, the girl from his literal dreams, almost like a manifestation of everything he wants from a girl, but just not enough that she actually has any actual thoughts and dreams of her own. Ramona is a girl that is seemingly not like other girls and is subjected to that lens by the movie itself. And yet, despite her quirkiness, which would signal individuality and perhaps a strong personality, she is far from it. Removed and somewhat cold, she is used primarily as a tool to allow Scott to figure himself out and right his wrongs, and even being the damsel in distress if needed to help Scott finish off his final act and resolve all his terrible wrongdoings, which are just all forgiven. On a recent rewatch of the Scott Pilgrim movie, I won't lie, I did enjoy it, but it wasn't like the first time I watched it. Ramona felt as if a caricature, this hypersexualized, emotionless woman who could be molded into whoever Scott wanted her or needed her to be. She served to be his guide, his partner, and also his damsel in distress. In a sense, the way in which Ramona was portrayed in the 2010 film could only be described as a form of weird objectification, in which Ramona was given somewhat of a personality, but one which could probably only be quantified in terms of her visual appearance. In essence, her visual attractiveness acted as her personality. But what about Scott Pilgrim Takes Off?
I had a dream about that girl again.
When I first watched Scott Pilgrim Takes Off, I realized a distinct difference that became extremely apparent the more episodes I watched. Ramona was different. She carried a different air about her the longer the series progresses, and while still containing the essence of what made Ramona, well, Ramona, the different shades of yellow, green, purple, pink, and orange on her head, the deep, low-pitched, almost monotone voice and nonchalant behavior almost constantly, she's her own person in this anime. In the movie, she has problems, and then now needs Scott to face these problems and literally fight with these 7 problems to get to win the girl. But now, in the show, with Scott gone, it's only Ramona left with her problems, and instead of running away from them or instead of relying on a man to face those problems for her in order to gain her love, Scott Pilgrim Takes Off allows her to face and deal with these problems by herself. An almost therapy-like collection of episodes that include her meeting with each of her 7 evil exes and providing that conclusion for all of them, to fight that battle for herself, and to fix the mistakes she made along the way. In Jennifer Gouck's article, she mentions that the typical manic pixie dream girl is, quote, not only transient, but silence. She states that the pixie girl is not only reduced to a single role to, quote, enrich the life of a male protagonist. For the pixie, however, the ability to speak is situated in relation to male voices. Any thoughts or feelings that she may express are mediated through the straight, white, cisgender, middle-class male protagonist. This mediation fosters an environment in which the Pixie is viewed as a two-dimensional object rather than a fleshed-out girl. In the 2010 movie, Ramona is indeed a two-dimensional character objectified to hell. But Ramona in Takes Off truly attempts with everything it has to strip Ramona of her pixie girl status, subverting every expectation of what previous iterations of her character should be. She is no longer made to enrich Scott. Indeed, in Takes Off, it takes a much more explicit stance on who Scott really is as a person. An asshole who groomed a high schooler, selfish and ignorant to the people around him, and unable to accept his wrongdoings. Through fighting her exes and reconciling with them, she grows and learns just that bit more about herself, going back to right all the wrongs she made in the past. Ramona isn't just a shell anymore. She's a flawed person who ran away from all her problems and hurt all the people she has been with along the way. But now here she was, left with the task of facing her past. In the first episode, when she goes on with her first date with Scott, she explicitly says,
"We don't have to talk about our pasts. It's my least favorite subject."
And yet she grows from this, learning that she does indeed need to face her past and all of her unresolved issues. And in that process, she learns, grows, and most importantly realized that she was the one who had those sparks with Scott, and decided to handle everything to try and get that Scott that she wanted back with her again. Instead of being an empty shell made for the male gaze, Ramona had grown so much more from that. She's a living, breathing character who has her own wants, needs, ideals, and her own unique personality. In the article by Gouck, it also mentions the concept of perpetual girlhood, derived from Hannah Dorman, in which Dorman describes a state of being that and is understood to be typically found in the Manic Pixie dream girl. This finds the Pixie girl in a state in which she achieves agency and, quote, the self-determined state of being. And ultimately, Dorman perceives perpetual girlhood as a good thing, a positive thing. It frames womanhood as not a linear progression to adulthood, but rather as an example that a woman, regardless of age, can be provided agency. In my eyes, I view perpetual girlhood as a form of character in media, in which a woman is able to do things that are not typically expected of her at her age, and yet is able to be competent and to be what she excels and perceives to be, even if she may be young. Think of an example, maybe Kiki from Kiki's Delivery Service. Kiki is an extremely young girl who is forced into adulthood and independence at a young age, due to the tradition and as the mandatory foundation as to become a witch, and as such, she performs and has to learn so many things in which a young girl such as herself is usually not expected to do, and yet is completely capable. However, Gouck states that when placed in the context of the Pixie girl, perpetual girlhood morphs into a negative trait. As since perpetual girlhood provides the Pixie girl with the idea in that she is youthful and yet is so capable, independent, etc., this inadvertently causes the Pixie girl to be, quote, permanently trapped in a state of perpetual girlhood, forever a teenage fantasy. And as the Pixie girl is always attempting to develop her own identity, quote, the self in which she constructs is not her own, but rather that of the male protagonist. The one who which the Pixie girl serves, may it be for the character's mission, ego, or to progress the narrative. Going back to Kiki, the way in which the movie explores the concept of moving away from family, living alone, and experiencing the highs and lows of achieving and experiencing independence and finding herself have nothing to do with a male protagonist. And just like Kiki, in Takes Off, Ramona is no longer that girl, no longer perpetually trapped by Scott. She, by taking her growth into her own hands, challenges the Pixie girl status that Ramona as a character has always been stereotyped as, and by the end of the show, she's not only a new person, different, more mature, more understanding, and more sure of herself than ever before. The most damning difference between the movie and the anime is that in the anime, it is truly warranted to say that she agreed to choose Scott, and not the other way around. Ramona went from being one of the most recognizable characters in Scott Pilgrim to still being one, but with so much more depth and so much more of a reason to care. In a way, Takes Off is almost like a revamp of Scott Pilgrim as a whole, going back in time to right their wrongs. It's a little overeager, maybe a little too optimistic, but ultimately one of the most enjoyable anime of 2023. Instead of Scott fighting to win Ramona, they fight their past and future selves, and grow together. And there's no way that doesn't show you growth from Brian Lee O'Malley and his crew. In an interview by Brian Lee O'Malley, he was asked about his thoughts on the new series spin-off, and he says this: "It always has interested me, the fact that you can get older but not grow up. As I get older, I realize so many people have no idea what they're doing. Maybe there's a sense that this is just a version of Scott that goes down the wrong path. And, maybe we can all learn from that and try not to go down that path ourselves. Sure, maybe I don't agree that this is the only version of Scott that goes down the wrong path, but regardless of that, what he says is indeed true. Now, I understand that characters can be flawed, and in the case of the comic, which I will admit I haven't read yet, I understand a lot of the idea is recognizing Scott is indeed an asshole and that is a focus in the comics, but in the context of the 2010 movie, Scott is a groomer, and is indeed a complete asshole, and so much more, with honestly not that much of any repercussions whatsoever. And that is criticism that I think is completely warranted, considering I don't think the movie does much, if not anything, to frame his actions in a bad way, other than the occasional jab by characters such as Kim or Wallace. The 2010 film won't be the first, nor the last film to do this, idolizing what needs to be put down, and reinforcing negative stereotypes and mindsets, but maybe, just like Ramona and Scott in Takes Off, through all the soul searching and all the flaws, maybe we've just made it right this time.
Back to them. So this show is all about love, even though it's a little tricksy and you know, it's a prank. I do all that out of love, and I just want to inspire joy in people, you know, joy and emotions and sadness and cool fights.